Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by. Welcome to the Essential Factors to Enhance Your Hiring Approach webinar. Please note, during the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Wednesday, December 3rd, 2014. My name is Stephanie Thomas, and I am your host on behalf of HRdirect. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's presentation. I am pleased to introduce you to our speaker for today, HR strategist Robin Schooling. I would now like to turn it over to you, Robin. Thank you for being here today with us.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, Stephanie, and I'm actually very excited about today's webinar and thrilled to be here. My name is Robin Schooling, as we said, and I'm currently Managing Director of Silver Zebras, which is the name of my HR consulting business. And I've worked as an HR and recruiting leader for 25 years, and now as a consultant, work with a variety of businesses to assist them in developing their fully integrated HR and talent strategies. And I love everything about HR because we who work with people have a primary role in creating business success by leveraging the talents and capabilities of people. But I'm more than just an HR practitioner. I'm also a blogger. I have a blog at HR Schoolhouse and write for a variety of other publications and sites. And I like to get out and speak to HR and business audiences around the country about topics such as the one we're going to talk about today. And day to day, I live in Louisiana with my husband and my 3 crazy dogs. I love coffee. I love my New Orleans Saints and hope that we salvage the season at some stage here. And as always here in Louisiana, I'm already looking forward to Mardi Gras season. So a lot of interesting things going on all the time. But what we're going to talk about today is a little bit different than all of those things. Because today we're going to talk about how to evaluate candidates using a matrix. So basically when we look at this, there are 4 commonly recognized categories for screening job candidates: by their education and skills, their experience, their personality, and their pre-employment test results. And today I'm going to go through each of these categories and share some specifics to help you get the most out of the hiring process, and most importantly, how to make smarter decisions with every new hire. And to kick us off, and before we get into the meat of the conversation, let's conduct a brief poll. And if everyone on the conference can chime in on this, we'd like to see which of these you normally prioritize when evaluating candidates: education and skills, experience, personality, or pre-employment test results. Now obviously each one matters, but many times we may favor one category over another, or we may encounter situations where a certain category nudges a candidate above the rest. As an example, let's imagine that you're hiring for a mid-level non-supervisory role. You may have 2 applicants, person A and person B. Now they both had strong interviews and they both meet all the job qualifications, but person A may have more years of experience, but person B seems to fit your company culture better. Which one would you hire? That's really what we're looking at. And it's interesting to see these results coming in. Thus far, we have one that's fairly clearly in the lead, although they're distributing, changing up a little bit as we go on. A couple are neck and neck. I think everybody's going to be real interested to see what the results are. It looks like our poll is just about finished here. So let's take a look at those results. It certainly looks like we've got 2 primary factors here that folks are looking at. You seem to be saying that you look at experience and personality above education skills and above pre-employment test results. Kind of interesting feedback here. What we're going to do today as we dive into this, and we'll reference this poll again as we move on, is we're going to take a look at each of these factors, and we're going to talk about how they govern really and become important in your hiring decisions. So the first area that I want to talk about today is education and skills. And when we look at education and skills, we know that this is often the starting point, especially for a lot of entry-level positions. Those positions which typically attract either recent graduates with limited work experience or attract people who are looking to make a career change. So those people making that career change may lack experience in a particular field or in a particular industry. And when you're evaluating those candidates, you're probably going to look more closely at their educational background or other learned skills that they have. So as we take a look at education and skills, the question that I challenge everybody to ask is a college degree, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, required for the position? And think about the fact that you're hiring for a person. You're hiring a person. You're not hiring a resume. So what are some things that we look at? When we talk about education and skills, we realize that sometimes those entry-level jobs demand a candidate who's willing to roll up his or her sleeves and learn while they're doing the job. It's at those times that we may consider hiring an applicant without a degree, perhaps even hiring them into a temp or contract position so that you can get a feel for their desire to work and their ability to adapt to on-the-job training. In any event, before starting that recruitment or hiring process, it's important that you complete a full and thorough evaluation of actually the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities needed to accomplish the necessary job duties. It's really at that point that it's necessary to ask, is a 4-year degree truly required or a 2-year degree? Perhaps it's perfectly acceptable to hire an individual with a combination of education and experience. So certainly something to consider when looking at education and skills. Now another hot topic related to this, and when we talk about candidates and candidate educational levels, is to think about MOOCs, massive open online courses. And a lot of people are enrolling in these classes now. There are over 10 million enrollees at last count, and they're taking courses in just about anything. So some students of all ages are studying new fields in which they're interested, and others may be taking classes to improve their current skills or just learn something new. Currently, more than 1,200 courses are available at approximately 200 universities, and that includes some pretty prestigious schools like Stanford or UPenn. Typically, these courses are not graded outside of a pass-fail, and students can't earn degrees, but they do earn certificates of achievement.
So, Robin, I have a question here for you that we just received. How strongly should you weigh these type of courses? Because, they're new. And how can you determine the level of education or amount of learning that the candidate received from taking the course, if they passed through it or just skimmed it? How can you evaluate that?
Well, I think that's a good question because MOOCs are, of course, still very new. A lot of us are really just diving into these for the first time, and there really aren't any popular hiring guidelines just yet. That's going to be specific to your organization, specific to your company's needs and what you're looking for. But the best way to find out how much a candidate learned from an online course, for example, or a program or any related training that they've gone to, is to ask open-ended questions during the interview. I mean, it's pretty easy to dive in and ask someone, why did you take the course? What was your motivation? Or, how did this course or this particular program that you completed help you in your career thus far, or how do you anticipate it? assisting you moving forward in this new position that we're hiring for. So it definitely is something to be explored, and think about how you're going to ask those questions, because you can determine the level of learning certainly during the interview process.
Robin, we just received a great question from Lori. Can you please repeat the acronym MOOCs and describe what that means?
Sure. MOOC, M-O-O-C, again, stands for Massive Open Online Course. And as we saw on the slide, let me go back to that a second. Here are just a couple of sort of composite MOOCs that you can check out. So check out Udacity, edX, Udemy, U-D-E-M-Y is another MOOC. So those are sort of some general MOOCs that are available. But again, many universities now are offering the same sort of training, the same sort of educational experiences, not degrees, pass-fail, certificates of completion, but we're really starting to see a lot more job seekers, even our current employees, our existing employees, who are taking advantage of the learning opportunities. So Google MOOCs or check out Massive Open Online Courses, and you'll find a wealth of information. Good question, Lori. Thanks for asking that. And let's get back to education and skills, and thinking again about how we look at that factor when we're making those hiring decisions. And I think we know that while education is certainly relevant, especially when we're looking at those entry-level jobs, folks who are fresh out of college or job applicants who are currently undergoing training, it may not always be the strongest factor to consider for candidates whose education is perhaps 10 or more years old, possibly outdated. And I think we saw that perhaps reflected in that poll that we did, where our attendees here on the webinar indicated that we take a look at experience, perhaps a little bit more than education and skills. So let's dive into and talk about experience as one of the factors when taking an approach to hiring. Because while we know that education and learning is certainly a great backbone and something that we anticipate our candidates will come in with, with some foundational knowledge, if you're like most employers, you're usually interested, and most especially interested, in experience. And we certainly understand why we take a look at experience, because there is really no substitute for what someone has previously done. Their knowledge, their on-the-job training, their on-the-job experience, and especially when we take a look at higher-level jobs. There are a number of studies. There was a Cal State study that came out that stated, that pre-career work experience really started to pick up as crucial to hiring. And we take a look at what people are bringing in the door with them, no matter their age, quite frankly. And it's certainly something that we've talked about for a long time. It's been the case for many years, where a lot of younger candidates these days will complain about the requirements that we put on them for experience. They're quick to point out that even the most basic entry-level jobs expect the candidates to already have the experience. So it's the perfect catch-22. There's no way for someone to get their foot in the door without already having their foot in the door. And in the past, we've certainly seen, and currently do still see, of course, internships. But we run into issues sometimes with finding individuals who've had internships, because many internships are certainly unpaid, even though there are some issues sometimes with that. And not everyone can afford or has the time and ability to participate in an internship program. And it does become somewhat of a factor, especially when we're looking at those new grads, the folks coming into the workplace, because according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and here's some information that they recently released here this past July, the unemployment rate of 16 to 24-year-olds is just over 14%. Now that's down over the last 4 years, but there are still a lot of young people without jobs, and so they're not building that experience. And so here's sort of, again, something to reflect upon as you're planning your hiring approach. When you're hiring for entry-level positions and you're considering candidates, start thinking about how you'll identify what we call transferable skills. So not just specific experience or that someone who's interviewing for position A held exactly the same sort of position somewhere else, but what can they transfer? What other sorts of skill sets can they bring with them? So for example, think about someone who's worked in a stockroom at a retail store. The skills that they may have developed, what they will have learned, what you can dive in and find out about are their organizational skills. They've probably learned that, and they probably have a good eye for detail and record keeping. So those are some examples of transferable skills that you can take a look at to sort of determine someone's related experience. And you know, one thing as well that we don't talk a lot about with experience is that not all experience is, you know, what we could call good. So we may be evaluating a candidate who has 5 years experience, but we're familiar with their organization, or we're familiar with the boss that they've worked for at another organization. And so this may be an organization that has questionable policies or does things that we don't necessarily agree with. So while we're looking at that experience, we also need to wonder and think about and try to determine if that candidate, if that employee has developed some bad habits or may have a negative demeanor because of certain conditions that they've worked in before. But you, of course, in your particular organization, need to determine the level of experience that you believe will drive success in your organization. What types of experience will your ideal candidates, your ideal employees have, and why is that beneficial? Now, one of the most prominent examples of a company that has done this very well is Google. Google has very clearly defined the types of people they'll hire and the types of experience that they desire. And when we look at this quote from Laszlo Bock, who's their CHRO, they're committed as an organization. They've stated it pretty clearly. We would rather hire smart, curious people than people who are deep, deep experts in one area or another. Somebody who's been doing the same thing forever may just replicate what they've done before. And Google is looking pretty clearly for people who are bright, curious, and can learn. So it's sort of an interesting exercise to go through in your organization to take the time to define what an ideal candidate will look like, what an ideal employee will look like.
So Robin, we have another question. How is it possible to uncover these less than desirable experiences, and how would you evaluate that?
Well, you know, really that comes down to asking the right questions during an interview, which you know, we want to talk about that interview process, because asking the right questions can also help you determine if, for example, a candidate has picked up any less than desirable habits. Aim for questions about what the candidate didn't like about a previous job, or if there was anything that he or she would have changed. The candidate certainly may be hesitant to speak candidly about a former employer or their current employer, but you can often read between the lines and pick up on body language and nonverbal cues. And a very, very effective interviewing style, which can assist you in gathering information about the whole person, is behavioral interviewing. It's a specific style of interviewing, and it's based on the theory that how a person has behaved in the past is a good predictor of how they'll behave in the future. And if you're not familiar with this concept, if you're not familiar with behavioral interviewing, I encourage you to Google it. Just Google behavioral interviewing, and you can explore it and see how it can be a very effective style of interviewing. It allows you to very easily get a picture of the whole candidate and also uncover, as I said, those negative experiences, those less than desirable experiences can really come out by using that style. And as I've got listed here on the slide, another factor which may or may not be negative. Again, it depends on the position, your organization, what you're looking for. But think about the fact that experience can be outdated too. Someone who has 5 years of experience from 20 years ago may not be up to date on best practices or industry trends. If your industry isn't fast-paced or doesn't require regular training and updating, you may be fine asking general questions about experience. However, when you're hiring for an industry or an organization that frequently changes, or you're hiring specific positions, IT positions, medical, legal fields, things like that, you're naturally going to be a little more detailed in assessing whether a candidate is up to date, whether that experience that they have is still pertinent. And I think really the way to look at it is know that you're looking at two things. You're really looking at both the relevancy of their experience as well as the recency of their experience. And you need to make that determination of which is more important, or to what level is the recency of experience important. So that's kind of a key thing to look at.
Robin, sorry to interrupt you there, but we did get a great question that I thought was related to what you were talking about. Do short-term experiences and the duration of a job experience, if it's a couple months or less than a year, should you factor those in when you're prioritizing these traits?
My personal belief is, again, you're going to look at the wholeness of that candidate, the wholeness of that individual. And 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, there was sort of a general, consensus that people needed to stay at a job for a certain amount of time. That showed loyalty. That showed that they were really getting the job done because they had been there 2, 3, 5, 8 years. I think that has changed for a number of reasons. I mean, certainly the economy, the recession played a factor in that. There are a number of highly qualified, highly experienced people in a variety of fields who, through no fault of their own, have found themselves out of work. They may have started a job and been at a job for 3 months or 6 months, and they were laid off, or a division closed, or they lost that position. So I hesitate to take a look at someone's length at a particular organization or length in a position, because we really don't know all the factors. And the reality is as well that there may be issues related to that candidate's fit, that candidate's fit with an organization's culture, and it just made it not a good job for them. And I think that's okay, but again, we don't know that until we talk to the person. So at first glance, I would not look at a resume or an application and discount someone because of what on the surface looks like a lot of job changes. So I hope that answered the question a little bit, and it's actually kind of a good segue into our next section, the next factor that we're going to talk about, because there's a lot of talk these days in the HR world, in the business world, about corporate culture and hiring for fit, and how important that is. And again, when we took a look at our poll results from earlier in the webinar, we saw that was a high-ranking answer. So I think we all understand the need to have somebody that fits in our organization. And for the sake of conversation today, we're calling it personality. We're talking about personality taking a starring role in the hiring process. And we define personality as the combination of characteristics or qualities that form an individual's distinctive character. The question we come into then, of course, is how can you really judge personality? Are we evaluating someone's personality from interviews? People are certainly going to put their best foot forward when they're interviewing. So how can you get to know that whole person, their real personality? After all, we're evaluating someone's nature, their disposition, and their temperament. So it's a question we need to ask ourselves. And I think there are a couple of things to remember and to look at. We want to remember that we're talking about corporate culture and hiring for fit. And we need to be cautious when we talk about that and really make sure that it's related to the job and what we're doing in our organizations. So how do we evaluate that personality, if you will, that fit during an interview? And I think this is where you as the interviewer can do a couple of things. You should try to keep things as human, as real, and as personable as possible. Try to warm candidates up, for want of a better word, and make them feel comfortable. Take time for small talk. It's not easy for a lot of people, but it does make it more of a conversation and less of an interrogation. This is not, Law and Order SVU, where we're holding a flashlight in the person's face. This is a conversation. This is a learning opportunity for both the interviewer and the candidate. So that's certainly one opportunity that we have to find out about what makes a person tick, what their personal characteristics are really like. The other way that we can find out about their fit and their personality is by checking references. Call references, call previous employers. I really can't stress the importance of doing this. Doing this is critical to the success of your hiring. You'd be surprised what you can find out from previous employers if you do a little digging, legally, of course, and doing things in an appropriate way. But it's important to gather that information. Call every reference until you can find someone who will talk. And a lot of times we ask for sort of the standard 3 references. Well, if you really can't get anything other than dates of employment and name, rank, and serial number, consider asking the candidate to provide further references if possible. Find someone that, if not a previous direct manager of this candidate, perhaps was someone who worked on the team with them, a coworker, a peer, a colleague, someone perhaps that they've even worked on some sort of school project with, someone to give you a sense of this person's work style, personality, and how they operate. The key, though, when talking about culture fit and organizational fit and assessing these characteristics of candidates is to be very aware of interviewing bias and what can happen with that. You have to try very hard to avoid any sort of bias. So what do I mean by that? Well, since we're all human beings, our reactions and our decisions may be vulnerable to biases that we have formed in any number of ways. We could be looking to confirm preconceived beliefs that we have about another person. Or we may have our decisions swayed by superficial factors, such as the attractiveness of a candidate. And, you know, while you may be swayed by someone's shining personality or their easy rapport with you during the interview, it's important to remember that the decision you're trying to make is whether he or she is the absolute best person for the job. And this is where second interviews are particularly useful. If it's possible, have the candidate interview with another manager at your company. Consider doing team interviews. Perhaps the work team, the coworkers that this candidate would be working with. Have multiple managers, multiple employees interview your candidates. Again, be consistent in your process, but the added feedback and the insights that you get will be very helpful with your final assessment and your final hiring decision. When we look at personality as one of these factors, it's again something to be very aware of. You know, it can be hard to hire by personality or by fit because you won't necessarily see someone's true and authentic self during an interview. They could be nervous. And an interview in and of itself is a pretty artificial environment that we've created. But that being said, that A word that we like to use a lot, attitude, can go a long way. And that's often what we initially pick up on during the recruiting process and during the interview situation. We look at someone who has the right outlook, they have an optimistic approach. Perhaps that drives them to perform in any job under any circumstances. Whereas conversely, we may have a well-qualified candidate, that person with the experience that we may be evaluating, but they're very pessimistic during the interview process or when we have interactions with them. And so we evaluate that and we start thinking, how are they going to fit in our organization? Will they fail no matter what? And in many respects, again, be very cautious about tying this to business necessity. But what we're looking at is likability factor. It's natural for us as human beings to want to work with people we like. But again, be conscious of that and be very aware of the potential for biases, good or bad biases, so as not to head into that territory of I'm hiring people just like me. We don't want to fall into that. And I just happened to see a question because I have the chat, the questions popping up, and I'm gonna grab this one. Chelsea asked a question. Are there any lighthearted questions that you should stay away from when interviewing a person? You know, and I think that's a good question to ask because we talk about the importance of building rapport. We want people to be comfortable. We want it to be a conversation. But the thing to be cautious of is not to get into any territory that may be potentially, doesn't mean it's your intention, but it may be potentially viewed as something that's discriminatory. So I kind of follow the same rule that, you know, perhaps some of you followed at Thanksgiving. Don't talk about certain subjects with certain people. So stay away from religion, stay away from politics, stay away from the sorts of topics that you wouldn't necessarily want to talk about with a stranger to that degree. So anything that's related to, you know, their family status, how many children that they have, anything that potentially could be viewed as something that's not related to the job and potentially discriminatory should be avoided. So I think lighthearted questions, it's perhaps not so much lighthearted as positive questions. Think about how you can draw the person out about things that they like, things that they enjoy in a job setting, in a work setting. Talk to them or ask them questions about, tell me about a time when you had fun at work. That's a good question to ask. It's sort of a light subject. We're trying to get a sense of what they enjoy, And it also can give you good insight, again, into that personality, into how they get along with others, because when they start telling you about what fun times they've had at work, it gives you a good sense of how they would fit into your work environment. So I just wanted to kind of take a side note there and answer that question.
Robin, I also wanted to chime in and go on top of that with another question that came in. Do you have to ask the exact same questions during the interviews? Is it okay, in your opinion, to stray from the set questions to find out more about something they have listed on their resume but aren't bringing it up themselves?
I'm going to answer that with a yes and yes. It is always a good idea to approach the interview process in a systematic way, because there are some steps that you're going to have taken as you make that approach to hiring that will lay this foundation. And part of that becomes determining, again, what's this combination of skills, experience, education, organizational fit. What's that combination we're looking for this particular position? So you, yes, definitely are going to have some set questions, the exact same questions. And you're going to want to make sure to ask all your candidates those same questions, because at the end of the day, you're comparing candidate to candidate to make the best hiring decision, so give everyone the same opportunity. However, you definitely will want to and should deviate from those when you're digging down a little bit further. So you can start with those those same questions of every candidate, but then as you're talking to candidate A, and candidate A starts relaying an experience that she had working on a project, for example, you're going to want to probe further into that. And you may find yourself going down a side path with that candidate that you wouldn't go with another candidate, because you're talking about her specific experience, what she's done, this project she's worked on, the accomplishments, the actions she took, what the results of it were. So you most definitely will find yourself, as a good interviewer, asking additional questions, probing questions, and that is not only perfectly fine, it's what you want to do. So absolutely, good question.
And we do have a few more questions rolling in that I think would be great to talk about now. Robin, Cindy asked, are you allowed to ask them the reason that they left their last job?
Yes, you absolutely can, and you absolutely should, because again, that will tell you perhaps a lot of things that you need to know and that you're looking to uncover. Now, be aware that, again, some people are going to be hesitant about telling you perhaps the truth. And I'm not saying people are necessarily going to outright lie, but they may dance around it a little bit. So just asking, well, why did you leave company ABC, you will probably more than likely hear some of the same answers all the time. I was ready for a new opportunity. I needed more challenge. Being people, put a positive spin on it. But if you have the opportunity during that interview to dive down, you can probably uncover additional information about that. When you're talking to that candidate about what they liked and what they didn't like at company ABC, you will probably start to hear a little bit more of the reality of what was going on in that job. And that's most definitely what you want to do, because that helps you determine if they're going to match the working conditions that you have at your organization. Now, again, some people may be hesitant to tell you things. You may or may not uncover that information during a reference check. But remember, we talked about making that candidate comfortable and indulging in small talk and all the little niceties that go on during an interview. If you set the right climate, you set the right environment during that interview, and it is a conversation, you'll be amazed at how much more willing candidates will be to tell you the reality. If you are able to converse with them and not appear as if you're judging their answers, people will tell you some pretty amazing things if they see it as a free flow of information and a conversation as opposed to an interrogation. I hope that answers that question. Did we have another one, Stephanie, or should we move on and capture questions at the end?
We are capturing questions at the end, so I'm sure if we have a few moments at the end, we will get to all of the questions. But I did want to ask one more that came in from Judy. Should you take notes during the interview? There are two schools of thought on this. My personal belief and what I have always done and what I advocate is most definitely taking notes, and doing that for a couple of reasons. One, it helps me as the interviewer remember things. Now, I don't sit there and write down a paragraph or word for word what somebody is saying, but when I enter an interview, I always have what I call an interview guide. So I have pre-planned questions. Again, for consistency, I'm making sure that I'm asking all candidates the same thing. So I do start with an interview guide, so I know what I'm going to talk about. And I take shorthand notes. I just capture general big concepts. When I ask someone a question, they give me an answer. I just, during the course of the interview, jot that down so that I remember. Because during the course of one day, I may conduct, if it's a busy day, 8 to 10 interviews potentially. Or during the course of recruiting for a position, I may spread that out over a number of weeks. And so I want to be able to remember what candidate A told me as opposed to candidate F. So notes are very helpful for that purpose. I think it's, again, sort of comes back to setting that tone and that conversational, making people at ease part of the interview. It's a nice thing to alert the candidate at the beginning of the interview that you will be taking notes. So I usually start off by letting that candidate sitting across from me know that, oh, don't be alarmed. I've got some questions here I'm going to ask you, and I will be taking notes just so that I can remember what you told me. And it kind of puts them at ease, and they don't try to wonder what strange things you're writing down. So I definitely advise taking notes. All right. Well, let's, and I know we've got some more questions, I think, coming in, Stephanie, but let's dive into the next factor and talk about that a little bit, because we've already gone through education and skills. We've talked about experience. We've talked about culture fit and personality, personal characteristics. But the fourth factor that we wanted to talk about today is pre-employment testing results. And these are quite often the last factor that we'll consider, the last metric that we'll look at, but they're still quite important. Even though they may be the last thing that we look at, they are quite often what helps us narrow the field, helps us make a decision. So if we've narrowed the field from our initial applicants to the folks that we've interviewed, we may get to the point where we've got a couple of final candidates, and let's imagine that those are the folks that we're taking through this pre-employment testing. Those testing results can contribute to that crucial moment in the hiring process, which is when we're making our final decision. So Robin, I did want to know, if you were using pre-employment tests, how much weight should you give the scores?
Well, I think that's something that becomes decided upon, specifically within your organization, and how much weight you're going going to give them. They're often, as I said, the last metrics that we're going to consider, but they are often very effective in helping us decide, for example, between two very strong or similarly situated candidates. So the weight that we give them will kind of fit in, will really be determined by the weight that we're giving the other factors. And so what I want to do is take a look at a couple of very common pre-employment tests.
Robin, I want to just pause you right there. We're getting some great questions that might be relevant right now before you dive in.
Okay.
At which point during the interview process should pre-employment tests be given?
Well, I'm going to answer that with a it depends. I think it depends on a couple of different factors. So quite often, in my experience, it's been most effective once you've narrowed down your candidate pool. So if we imagine a typical applicant funnel type of thing. So picture a funnel, and we may have 100 applicants for a position, and after we sort of do an initial review, perhaps we get those applicants down to 20 applicants that are under consideration, and then we determine that we're going to interview 10 of those applicants, and we end up with a final 4 candidates that are given final consideration. It's really at those bottom steps in that funnel that I think pre-employment testing is particularly effective. You're down to the final candidates under consideration, or you're down to sort of your primary pool. So you maybe started with 100, you got it down to maybe an initial sort of 20. There's 10 candidates that you're strongly considering you're bringing in for interviews. It's often effective to do that assessment with that group or with the final group of final candidates that are under consideration. But again, you're going to take a look at doing this consistently in your organization. So you're going to kind of want to map out a process. You're going to have that workflow down so that you're determining when and how you will bring in any assessments. So that it's consistent, it's compliant, you're treating everyone equitably and fairly throughout the process at any time.
I think you covered that. Thanks so much.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about a couple of different types of pre-employment assessments, and perhaps that will get at a couple other questions that may or may not come in. The first to look at is aptitude tests. And aptitude tests are those that are designed to give you an idea of a candidate's behavioral tendencies, their personality and their behavioral tendencies. The results will usually tell you, for example, if an individual is good at working with other people, how creatively they think, whether they're more logical or emotional, any other number of traits. And these tests are designed to flag inconsistencies in answers. So the tests themselves, when they're validated, when they are a predictive indicator and something that's been rigorously tested, will be the sorts of tools that you can use to determine what a person's sort of behavioral tendencies are, how they are apt to act. I hesitate to use the word personality because it's not necessarily a personality test, but it gives you a sense of the real way that they will work, what their general work style will be, and how they're going to approach the working conditions at your organization. So that's an aptitude test. The other type of pre-employment testing that's commonly used are skill tests. And skill tests may be online assessments. It may be a sample project that you have candidates produce, something that you're looking to to see where the candidate can demonstrate if they can apply their knowledge and their skills that they've listed on their resume or that you've talked to them about. Now, the challenge is that, we tend to take a look at some of these assessments and think, well, candidates may have figured out how to game the system, and they know the answers that we're looking for. While some tests can and do look at sort of verifying the validity of the answers, they're not entirely foolproof, and candidates sometimes may give neutral answers, which won't tell you much about their actual work styles and that sort of thing. But if you take a look at pre-employment testing and consider using that, and you research the tools that you're going to use, you'll get a very good sense of how those tools can help you if that becomes one of the factors that's important in your hiring approach. And one word of caution, quite frankly, though, is to think about compliance issues with any sort of testing. It's important to remember that a pre-employment test is considered a selection tool. And as such, you need to, again, make sure it's related to the job. You need to make sure that it's non-discriminatory, that you're applying it consistently according to your process, because all of these testing and selection tools need to follow the Uniform Guidelines on Employee Selection Procedures, which is the guidelines that the EEOC puts out for employers on anything to do with selection. So depending upon your test, for example, you need to really consider things such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, because that comes into play when you're looking at testing. So as an example, a candidate who has a reading disorder may not perform very well on a timed test, but would deliver excellent work in an office environment where there are less stringent deadlines. So think about that. Unless it's critical to the job, try not to administer timed tests, perhaps, or don't view a slower time record as automatically a bad thing. Remember that under the ADA, you may ask applicants if they can perform the essential functions of the job with or without an accommodation. But again, make sure you're asking all applicants that same question, and think about the accommodation process during any testing or interviewing or any selection phase as well. So that duty to accommodate for individuals with disabilities also includes removing barriers in that application process. You're allowing individuals with disabilities to compete equally for jobs. So think about if you need to modify your application forms or your testing procedures or even your facilities to allow disabled applicants to participate. So it's a critical thing to think about, obviously, throughout any of our processes, but it certainly comes into play during the hiring process, during the selection, during the recruiting process, all of these things. And when we look at pre-employment tests, think about if you're using those, how you're going to use them. Make sure that they're fair, they're designed fairly. Make sure that the tests have been validated, and make sure you know the results that you're looking for. Aptitude tests may help you hire for behavioral tendencies, personality, fit. Those are the types of pre-employment tests that are often brought in for that part of the process. And skills tests can verify certain experiences or a knowledge base that an applicant may have. So those are the two distinctions between some pretty common tests that are used. But the bottom line is take a look at all of those factors when you decide to get into some pre-employment testing. And what I wanted to do now is, after we've covered these four factors, I'm kind of interested to see if anyone has changed their opinion. What do you think is the most important factor when hiring. So we've talked about the pros and cons of each, what works, what doesn't, and hopefully you've picked up some new insights to guide you in your hiring process. And let's see if it's changed anyone's thoughts at all. Our results are coming in. We're taking a look at those. Ooh, we're a little more neck and neck actually right now. But our two main categories are still our strongest categories, which is very interesting. We've actually looked like we've dropped a little bit in education and skills as being perhaps the number one prioritized factor. And let's take a look at those results. And interesting, experience and personality came at the forefront of the poll we did earlier, and still are up there at the top. But I think it's interesting to note that education and skills and pre-employment test results have come down, excuse me, a little bit in that. So what are some final thoughts on this? I think what we've determined really is that it's a combination of things. There's really no single factor that determines who to hire, but rather it's a combination. And with education, we're looking for signs often that the candidate values learning and growth and in continuing their education. So a community college program, an Ivy League education, certainly have different connotations, but show the same amount of dedication and commitment. As we talked about, MOOCs may not be formal courses, but if someone is putting in the time to develop professionally, that may certainly be an important factor. When we take a look at experience, excuse me, everyone, don't underestimate the transferable skills that people have. During the interview, ask your candidate how their previous experience has prepared them. Example, a retail manager who worked crazy Black Friday last week is probably someone who won't crack under pressure and can lead a team through a crisis. Is that a transferable skill that could bring that person into a position even if they don't have the exact work experience that the position calls for? We've also talked about personality, excuse me, personality, which really, again, we're talking about culture fit. Corporate culture, organizational culture is a big buzzword these days, and lots of employers strive to hire for fit. Our poll here on the webinar certainly showed that that's key. Everybody's really thinking about that. So it's important to dive into that, but understand what you're looking for. Put your candidates at ease. Find ways to get information that gives you a sense of their true and authentic self. And then finally, pre-employment tests, which are really designed to help you perhaps narrow the field and take a look as a final metric. Whether this is a formal test or an assigned task or a project that you have candidates complete, make sure that your testing, your selection procedure related to testing is fair to the candidate and helpful for you. So, taking a look really at that ideal combination, I think depends on a number of things. For me, the ideal combination is pretty evenly split. But again, this is something that's going to fit your business and the role that you're hiring for. So, as an example, if I was hiring an IT employee, I would sort of do that assessment and determine what's more important to me. An IT employee, I'm going to weigh a little more heavily. This is my take on it. Their education and skills, are they current, are their certifications up to date, whatever the role may call for, and their experience. Those are going to be critical factors in that particular test, in that particular role to me. But again, that's not to say that's what's important to you. You have to make that determination for your organization and for your business, for your business needs. So, thanks everyone for attending. I hope we've left you today with some ideas for how you can more effectively evaluate job candidates and how to get the most out of your hiring process. It is a process, and it's a well-planned out process. We've highlighted the importance of creating a process that's fair and equitable. We want to make sure to eliminate discrimination and bias because, after all, your goal is to hire the right person for the right job, and that is the most essential factor of all. And I will now hand it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Robin, so much for being here with us today and presenting all of your information about hiring and what to prioritize. I think we've all learned a lot about how to weight all these different traits for interviewing candidates. And I wish we could get to all the questions today, but unfortunately we're out of time. So please interact with Robin and HRdirect on Twitter if you have any questions or just want to give feedback. And please note at the end of the presentation today, you will receive a survey to provide your feedback of the event. And as a reminder, within the next 2 days, you will receive an email that will include today's webinar slides and recording. A big thank you to Robin for sharing this valuable information again with us. We had a great time and a great conversation. Thank you all for attending and participating. Have a nice day.